On a dark November night in 2020, Susan was in a hurry to get to her 10th floor apartment located in one of the best buildings in New York City. She was a confident and self-reliant woman who loved her life in the city, but little did she know what lay ahead in her apartment. Tony, a 37-year-old security guard who worked in Susan's building, had been secretly observing her for days. He had fallen deeply in love with her and, consumed by his intense passion, he carefully planned his visit to Susan's apartment. He knew that she usually arrived home around 11 p.m., so he moved quickly to enter her apartment when she was away. He used a copied key to quietly open the building's front door and then took the elevator up to the 10th floor where Susan's apartment was located. When he reached the apartment door, he opened it quietly with a copy of the key. After entering, he hid behind the living room curtain, patiently waiting for Susan's return. As the hours ticked by, Tony's nerves grew more and more frayed. He had spent days planning this moment, and now that it was finally here, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something could go wrong. Despite his fears, however, he was determined to see this through. He had fallen deeply in love with Susan, and he couldn't bear the thought of being away from her any longer. With shaking hands, he clutched the rope and the gag, his palms slick with sweat. He took deep breaths, trying to calm himself, but the closer it got to Susan's arrival, the more he felt his nerves getting the better of him. He knew he had to stay focused, however, and stay true to the plan he had so carefully crafted. As he waited, he repeatedly rehearsed in his mind how he would approach Susan and immobilize her. He didn't want to hurt Susan, but he knew he had to act quickly to subdue her before she had a chance to scream for help. The sound of the front door opening jolted him out of his thoughts. Susan was finally home. Tony took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the curtain. He moved quickly and silently, closing the gap between him and Susan in a matter of seconds. He grabbed her from behind, muffling her scream with the gag as he tightly bound her hands and feet with the rope. Susan struggled against his grip, but Tony was too strong. In a time, she was completely immobilized, lying helplessly on the floor. Tony felt a rush of triumph as he looked down at Susan, his captive. He was finally near the woman he loved, and he felt a sense of elation that he had never experienced before. But Tony was not ready for the determined and fearless battle that Susan was about to wage. Despite his attempts to subdue her, Susan fought back with all her strength, kicking in a desperate bid for freedom. Suddenly, she remembered the nail clipper in her pocket and put it to use, breaking free from her bindings. She sprinted towards the kitchen with the guard hot on her heels, and when she arrived, she quickly snatched a knife and swung it wildly, cutting the guard's arm. The guard howled in pain and stumbled back, but Susan didn't let up. She raced towards the front door, Susan's heart pounding. However, when Susan reached the front door, she found that it was locked and her efforts to open it were in vain. The sound of the guard's footsteps closing in behind her filled the air with a growing sense of dread. She was trapped, and with each step he took, the reality of her situation hit harder. The guard soon recovered and approached Susan, his eyes fixed on the knife she held. She stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. As the guard lunged at her, she swung the knife with all her might, but it was no match for his strength. The struggle was intense, each movement more intense than the last, as both battled for the upper hand. But in the end, the guard overpowered her, taking her life in a cruel twist of fate. Despite Susan's valiant efforts, the intruder managed to flee the scene. However, due to the serious wound on his arm, he left behind a trail of blood. The police tracked the trail and eventually apprehended Tony, who faced charges of murder.